Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to be looking at Unit 1.6, Europe, and really hitting a number of different things today. All right, so we're looking at some of the causes and consequences of political decentralization in Europe from 1200 to 1450, some of the effects on social organization during this time, and kind of touch on religion a little bit and really kind of keep focusing on our focus on governance. And a little economics as well. All right, so we're going to begin with our daily five. So, one reason for the success of the cities of the Hanseatic League in the Italian city-states was that both were, right? So if you're not familiar with the Hanseatic Leagues, you don't really need to know much about them except that they are up here. And I will talk about the Hanseatic Leagues when we get going today. So Hanseatic Leagues are up here, and then our Italian city-states, Venice, Genoa, Pisa, Naples. Okay. All right, so take a moment, get your correct answer on that. All right, so hopefully you got 3 as your correct answer. Next one, which economic practice developed as a result? So we're looking for causation, effect here, all right? So an effect of the growth of the trade routes shown on this map. So take a moment. Through this. All right, so the correct answer is right. This illustration suggests that European feudal social class system was. So take a moment, look at this and think. Back when you're done. All right, so hopefully you got the correct answer as, all right, so the agrarian labor, the artisan labor is being performed by this bottom group, right, peasantry, during much of this era. All right, and which conclusion can be drawn from the information provided by the map? Take a moment and think about that. All right, and the correct answer is, all right, so, and during class today, I actually stopped it right here, and I told everyone to pull out their map drawing paper, right? Because we draw maps in here, right? So, so what I did with the class is I just kind of minimized this and use this as the guide, right? So I'll just kind of do the same with you, and then I'll kind of pull it out and you can do that, all right? So what I did is got my piece of paper. Right, and I kind of started here with North Africa over on like the bottom left of the page. Right, so I started with North Africa and kind of went my way up, and then right, since our focus is not Africa itself, I kind of dropped that off the map, and then I came back over here, kind of with the Eastern Mediterranean, over to the Anatolian Peninsula, all right. Right, and then went up through the Black Sea, right, Crimean Peninsula, right, kicked it back down where Constantinople is, right, let's just do Greece, right. And then bring Italy back down, raise your heel, and your boot. All right, and then the Iberian Peninsula. Let me slide this over. Right. Yes. What do you need help with? It's gonna be a while, okay? I'll help you in a bit. All right, so here's our Iberian Peninsula. Let's bring that over where France is, up to northern France, and then across the region there. All right, bring this up to where Denmark is. All right, and then our Baltic states. So we're just doing a rough map here. It doesn't have to be anywhere even remotely close to perfect. All right, so Finland, down Sweden, all right. Okay. west coast of Sweden. That's Gothenburg. All right, do a little Norway now, and then let's kind of kick that up. All right, so there's our basics. All right, I always like to draw Sicily. All right, just kind of see what it is Italy is kicking on here. All right, so we need to draw England as well. Let's kick out a little England real fast. Start over in Wales and kind of work our way over. Way up towards Scotland. All right, and then down. All right, and then I guess no, not to forget about Ireland. All right. Oh, hand spasm there. All right, so there's your basics. All right, there's your kind of basic map, my outline map. Let me just kind of show you. All right, something like that. It doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of spatially get the gist of it, get the idea of it. All right, and there's also a couple cities that I'm going to kind of throw on here, just to make sure we know where they are. All right, so Venice, which is from your summer assignment map. All right, but since we're getting into this time frame, all right, we need to know where Genoa is. All right, so obviously Columbus is from here, but also this is a major trade city. We also have Florence. All right, we also have Florence, a very important city-state, especially for banking. All right, I guess while we're over in this neck of the woods, we need to do Constantinople. Just so you know where that is, Constantinople. All right, let's move over a little bit. And I guess we need to, let's always pay attention where Cordova is. All right, Cordova, Granada is down here. All right, so other cities you need to be aware of. I guess we'll do the old Roman city of Paris. Right, another old Roman city up here. London. Right. And then I'm going to draw just a bunch of other dots where cities are. Just so that you're kind of, we're going to talk about Hanseatic cities here in a bit. Amsterdam, Hamburg, right? Back, right? Go to like northern Poland, where Danzig is. Novgorod, right? All right, so yes, I guess you can do Stockholm, Gothenburg, Stockholm. You can do all kinds of other cities, right? So, all right, let's kind of leave it at that for now. All right. So this is what your map, your outline map should roughly look like. So we got a couple cities located here or identified here. And then we're going to come back and use this map in a few minutes. But we're going to finish our questions. All right, so let's finish our questions. All right, which headline best fits the partial outline below? And this is actually very similar to what our activity was in class yesterday. Yes, we were doing categories of analysis and then facts that supported those categories of analysis, or using facts to come up with a category of analysis. That's all this is. You got 4 different facts here, and which one would be a category of analysis that would be supported by these facts. All right, so this is exactly what we did with that claim building activity yesterday. So go ahead and take a moment, read through these, all right, and come up with your answer. All right, so 3 is the correct answer, right? There were a bunch. I've had a decent percentage, probably like 20 maybe, percent of students during class today who put 4 is the correct answer. And actually, that's not a terrible category of analysis for medieval Europe, right, for this time frame. However, these pieces of evidence would not support that category of analysis. So, that's why that one is wrong, right? It's not that the statement's wrong, it's just it doesn't match with these facts. All right, and once again, similar thing. This is just another claim development activity here. You've got 4 facts: new universities, 3 field systems, Magna Carta. If you don't know what that is, we'll talk about that. and Gothic cathedrals. If you don't know what that is, we'll talk about that. Right? So if you get 4 facts here, you don't need to know what they all mean. If you know 1 or 2, that should be enough. Just these categories of analysis are not nearly as accurate as the other ones, right? So go ahead and take a moment and answer that question. All right, so hopefully you got that as the correct answer. All right, Crusades, right? So the Crusades are a turning point. So things were one way before the Crusades, and then after the Crusades, they were another way, right? So that is Crusades were a turning point in history because so it's asking what is the effect of the Crusades, right? So our causation is our skill. What is the effect? So take a moment and think about it and come back when you're ready. All right, so hopefully you got 3 is the correct answer there. All right, and then our last question is the valid statement concerning the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages is that, so you get the church, this is referring to the Roman Catholic Church in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. So you get your parish priests perform sacraments, including matrimony, that means marriage, oversaw a spiritual life of community, conducted church services, and then we have our monastic groups, right? So monasteries and nuns within the covenants. They run the schools. They taught peasants, artisan skills. And skills to women as well, daughters of nobility as well. They run the early hospitals. The illuminated manuscript, right? They are scribes, hand copy on vellum mostly, right? Classical and religious writings, right? So what valid statement concerning the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages is that it what, right? So once again, just another category of analysis kind of question. All right, so here we go. I hope you get that as the correct answer. All right, so I said I'll talk about Gothic real quick, and in class we just do this as a very quick little Gothic or Romanesque activity. Since we're virtual, I've been just doing a poll on this. So I'll show you an image of a Gothic or a Romanesque church, and you're gonna tell me which it is. Right, so this image, of course, is from a very famous Gothic church, Notre Dame Cathedral. So if you've ever been to Paris, you probably know exactly where this is, right? Your Latin Quarter here, your Louvre, right up here, right, and then obvious other landmarks, right? So yes, all right. So there's 2 kind of dominant forms of church architecture during the medieval period, or this predates the medieval period. So Romanesque architecture, right? So kind of characterized by small windows, poor lighting, massive walls. When it comes to architecture, the real question is how are you going to support the weight, right? How is the weight of the building? How is the weight of the roof being supported? In this case here, big thick walls, right? Big thick walls is what's supporting the weight. When it comes to Gothic cathedrals, you've got much larger windows, which means less wall space to carry the weight. So, you will see a lot more stained glass because there's more windows, right? There's more glass there, so that then becomes part of the art, right? So, but because the windows are there, right, are larger, and you've got a lot less thick walls to carry the weight of the walls and the roof itself, then the question becomes how do you carry that weight? That weight has to be carried by something. Right? And the answer is things like flying buttresses. You'll often see these external structures, right? That instead of distributing the weight straight down, it carries it externally, right? Thus opening up much more wall space to be open. So more light comes in, and it's much more artistic, right? So this is a Gothic. So in class, I usually start the polls off with this one. Is this Gothic or is this Romanesque? There's actually surprising divergence on this, right? So, right, Gothic or Romanesque, right? Gothic or Romanesque, and generally speaking, kids have no trouble identifying the Gothics, right? Some of the Romanesques are a little questionable, but this is just a quick activity that we do in class just to make sure you can kind of differentiate them. All right, so let's kind of get to our map activities, all right? And let's do a few things. One is there's a couple kind of thematic things that I want to touch upon. I gotta find my pen. I'm holding on to my pen. All right. So the first thing I want to touch on is I want to do a couple thematic things with this map. All right. So one is I want to focus, well, just so that we all know, we're talking 1200 through 1450. All right, 1200 to 1450 is our real focus here, right? And we're going to do a couple thematic focuses here as well. Right? So one is we're going to talk a little bit about economics. All right, so economic. I want to talk a little bit about governance. Or if you like political better, let's use political. All right, governance or political. And I do want to talk a little bit, just kind of get into a couple social aspects of this time frame. All right, so let's start by just doing some general trends. Right, what are some general trends, or what are some kind of true for most places, but not all, in this period from 1200 to 1450? What kind of things are we seeing economically? Right, we are seeing a movement. MOV, there we go, spell right. Movement from local. All right, we're seeing a movement from local or self-sufficient. All right, self-sufficient type of economic activity to one based on long distance, based often, but a lot more long distance connections. All right, so what does that mean? That means like integration into like the Indian Ocean, Indian Ocean economics and Silk Road. Right? So we see a lot more of that taking place from 1200 to 1450, right? That's kind of the general trend, right? So away from the local, more towards integration into the wider economy. All right, so next, what is some truism for governances? We are seeing a movement from decentralized, right? Movement from decentralized towards centralized authority. Right? And what we're really talking about here mostly is monarchy. All right. So starting in 1200 towards 1450, you're seeing an increase in power towards the center, right, towards the monarchy. And this is a development that is going to continue beyond the year 1450 until we get to like the peak of monarchs and their consolidated centralized power, which will be in like the 1600s, right? And this will come to a head in a couple of ways, right? So we see that kind of consolidation of power taking place. All right, socially, what's our kind of truism socially? We are seeing a movement from serfdom, where people are bound to the land and are owned and literally can be bought or traded. Right, so movement from serfdom socially towards systems where labor is, let's just say, more free, right? Things like mercantilism. Yeah, eventually we're going to be talking about capitalism. All right, so much more kind of free movement of labor. All right, so what's causing this kind of transition to take place, and what are some resistance to these transitions? All right, so we got a map here of the Crusades. So the Crusades begin technically in 1095 when Urban calls for them. Pope Urban II calls for them in 1099 when they actually conquered the city of Jerusalem. But the Crusades run from the 1100s into the 1200s. So as our course begins in 1200, the first Crusades are, second Crusades and the third Crusades are already kind of done, right? And So as our course begins, we're really talking about the effects of the Crusades. All right. So when we look at the effects of the Crusades, there's going to be economic and social implications of the Crusades. That kind of need to be aware of. All right. So when we talk about the Crusades, this is kind of how we need to see it. Is we need to see this trade routes that occur and that rise as a result of this. So because of the Crusades, Italian merchants in places like Venice and Genoa are going to develop merchant trade relationships with places like Damascus and Jerusalem and Constantinople. And that is going to increase demand for goods, for things coming out of the Indian Ocean and across the Silk Road. That increase in merchant activity is going to have a spillover effect into the interior of Europe, right? Creating an intensification of trade over the course of hundreds of years, right? So we're talking hundreds of years here, right? But when we talk about the rise of the Italian city-states, right, this is something we can directly tie to the Crusades because of the merchant connections that are established. All right, so let's kind of get to our map here. All right. All right, so economically, what is one thing we need to have? All right, let's kind of just put on our key for economics. We've got a pink little highlighter. All right, so the Italian city-states. All right, our Italian city-states. Right, our Italian city-states. And just like when we talked about the Swahili city-states or the Mayan city-states, these are decentralized politically but culturally unified. In this case here, they're culturally unified through the Roman Catholic Church. Right? And what we're seeing is trade is on the increase as a result of the Crusades. Okay, as a result of the Crusades, right? We're seeing that trade, right, on the increase. All right, and let me just kind of, what are we talking about here? There's all kinds of Italian city-states that are way more than what I'm kind of showing you here, but we just need a couple of exemplars. All right, so this is that kind of general region of the Italian city-states. It will not be unified until the mid-1800s, late 1800s. Right, but the second half of the 1800s. But these are, this is the region I'm talking about. All right, the next thing that I'm talking about real quick is the Hanseatic League. Right, so the Hanseatic League will, right, as that intensification of trade develops, as we get into the 1300s, we're going to see a number of trade cities emerge in Northern Europe. Right, so we can see them labeled in yellow here, and they're not all on the water. You get into like Central Europe, okay, what is modern day Germany. There's a lot of interior cities up the rivers, right, as well, right? So you see the kind of general idea, and then other trading posts that are interconnected with these cities. All right, so a very wide kind of stretch here. All right, so these are our Hanseatic League cities. This is kind of right, our Hanseatic League. So these are cities, right? Cities, so they are decentralized. Right, they are decentralized, but it's during this. It's here that we have like free trade start to begin. You want to call this like a proto-European Union. That might be a bit of a stretch, but right. But this is this kind of region here of, I guess it does dip down kind of deep into Germany, but it's mostly coastal. Encapsulates Scandinavia as well. Scandinavian cities. This general area here, right? All right, so these are our Hanseatic leagues area, right? And I'll come back to this in a minute as well, because this is going to have other implications socially. All right, governance. All right, governance. Let's talk about governance real quick. This just kind of runs through some Hanseatic League. It runs for about 300 years, right? And then eventually it would become obsolete as we see the rise of things like joint stock companies in the 1600s. All right. So politically, governance. This is kind of a big deal, right? This is kind of a big deal, right? So because it's a turning point, and it's also kind of a good little example of a resistance towards a movement. So let's do this. So when it comes to governance, the general move is against. Right, the general move is towards centralization, but there will be resistance. All right, there will be some resistance towards the centralization of political authority. Right, and this resistance most strikingly takes place in England. Right, and of course, I guess because we're 1200 to 1450. To the end of the 100 Years' War, I guess we can still call this part of England. There you go. All right, so what are we seeing here? We're talking about something called the Magna Carta, right? Magna, M-A-G-N-A. If you know your Latin, great. And then Carta, C-A-R-T-A, the Great Charter. All right, so what is the Great Charter? Well, it's signed in 1215. Right, signed in 1215 by King John, and it is about limitation on the authority of the king, not just king, but all future kings as well. Right. So, what is this thing? Most of you probably. You may or may not have ever heard of Magna Carta. Some of you may have even seen it. I know I've dragged my kids up to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and then there's a copy of the Magna Carta at the National Archives. So some of you may have even seen it before. Right? If you're not familiar with what it is, you're probably familiar with the story. Like, so one of the kind of dozen incarnations of the story of Robin Hood. You've probably seen one of those. And that's the basic story, right? So you've got the kind of evil sheriff of Nottingham, right? It's Sheriff John. That's King John, right? And what King John does is he violates a number of different traditions, feudal norms, right? He violates a number of those things against the church and against the nobility, right? Against the barons. And, after this occurs a number of times, he... the barons and the church get together and they give John an option. Either he give up some of his authority, or the barons and the church will no longer fulfill their feudal obligation of supporting him. So John is put into a corner and is forced to sign this document. And in signing this document, he then has to get permission to do certain things. Right, so one of those things is taxation, right? So in order to tax, he needs to get permission from the barons, and that also effectively limits war as well, because you need taxes to go to war. So there's a number of different other things, right? We just need to understand, for the purposes of our course, is that limitations are being placed on the authority of the king, and this will eventually result in. By the time we get to the 1260s, the creation of Parliament. And that's a little oversimplified. Star Chamber, Parliament. It's a little oversimplified, and his Parliament will take hundreds of years to kind of come into its own. By the 1500s, by the time you get to the 1500s, it's probably the first time we're really going to talk about Parliament. We see King Henry VIII. Getting permission for the Act of Supremacy, right, in the 1530s. So by that point, I think you could say Parliament is going to come into its own, where the king feels the need to get permission to do major changes. But the absolute peak of this kind of governmental centralization of authority is in the 1600s, and France will definitely go all the way with this centralization of authority. England will try, right? The Stuart kings will definitely try, and they're going to come head to head with Parliament, and Parliament, will resist, and this is gonna, and we'll talk about this later in the course, right? We'll talk about this, the English Civil War. This is Cromwell, and maybe talk a little bit about Hobbes, and Leviathan, so that's all that, right? While we're talking about this, I probably should at least mention, just so that you've heard it once in your life, that there's another example of resistance towards this centralization, right? But you could probably say failed resistance, and that's happening here in France, right? So, kind of in this French area here, we do have the establishment of the Estates General, which is another like proto-legislative kind of body. And we'll talk about this later on in the course, right? So they will try to, they will also develop their own little check on the authority of the monarch. However, when we get into like the 1600s and Louis XIV, then the Estates General just won't even be called. For over 100 years, it won't be called until 1789, right? So it, this is one of those examples of when things come to a head, between the power of the monarch versus groups that are resistant to that centralization. France will eventually, to oversimplify it, it will not have as an effective of a check, right, as what will eventually develop out of England, right? So check on centralization, check on the power of government, really, right? All right, yeah, of course. All right, so Magna Carta, right? Magna Carta. So, all right, one last thing, one last little thing here. Because I do want to talk about social real quick, and it does kind of connect to all of this. Right? Is right. One is movement from serfdom. All right, and I guess we probably should say here that serfdom, right? Serfdom will come to an end in most of Europe. Let's just say most, not all. Right? Most of Europe, it'll come to an end around the year, right? Around the year 1347, right? 1347 to 1349, depending upon where you are, right? So let's just say 1347 to Southern Europe, 1349, in the north, depending upon where you are, right? So most, but not all, right? We're still going to be talking about serfdom in places like Russia until the 1860s, right? So not everywhere, right? So why does serfdom come to an end, right? So I'm going to change colors because you can't really see that very well, right? So why does serfdom come to an end? There's a bunch of reasons. The easiest reason is the plague, right? Okay, let's stop, Plague, bubonic plague, the Black Death. That's kind of the biggest reason why, right? But there's also other reasons, right? One is in the Italian city-states. You're going to see the rise of the merchant or the middle class, right? Rise of the middle class. Zoom in a little bit on that for you. Right, we're going to see the rise of the middle class. And when you hear that, that just means merchants. Right, that really just means merchants. Also, in Northern Europe, like in the Hanseatic cities, we're going to see the rise of the bourgeoisie, right? The rise of the bourgeoisie. Although in Germany it's burgers, although you never see that. I've literally never seen burger on a test question before. They always use the French phrase bourgeoisie. Right, so what does bourgeoisie mean? It means like city dweller technically, but for our purposes it means a merchant. Right, bourgeoisie is referring to merchants. All right, so with all that being said, what is the effect? Right, what is the effect of of these things? Well, so we take these. What are the effects of these? Right, and there are a couple things. One is the plague and the rise of these merchants and the kind of changing dynamics of the economy is going to result in the decline, right, in feudalism, right, or manoralism, right, whatever phrase you want to use to describe serfdom, right? So a lot of things are kind of coming together to result in the decline of that system. Governmental centralization is working towards the decline of that. Right? It's very multifaceted. All right. So, and of course, when you start talking about these merchants, right? Merchants, right? Functionally work against centralization. Right? They will functionally work against centralization. So if you look at where the merchants are the strongest in Europe, these are going to be the places where consolidation of authority and power happen the least, right? So the Italian city-states, you're not going to talk about a unified Italy until 1850 to 1870, right? So we go through that whole process of that 20-year of revolution. We're not going to talk about centralization of political authority in Germany until the 1860s and into the early 1870s, right? With Bismarck and his multiple wars to consolidate political authority in what we now call Germany, right? So the Holy Roman Empire is a whole series, right, in Central Europe of individual duchies and princedoms and, right, highly decentralized, where the power of the city, right, is paramount. So strong merchants function as a kind of a barrier towards centralization. And in places where the merchants were not as strong, like in France, they will be picked apart, right? And this is going to be, especially when you get into the 1600s, this is going to be where a lot of the battles between like Louis the 14th and the Huguenots are gonna flail up, right? So a lot of the rights of cities in France are going to be revoked. The walls are going to come down, if you would, right? So in other places that were a stronger Hanseatic League, they're going to really resist, right? Places like, in the Benelux countries, the Netherlands are going to be a whole series of city-states that resist attempts by monarchs, like the Spanish monarch or the French monarch, on a number of occasions, right? So, to really cement their authority in those major cities. Right, so these are kind of some of the dynamics that we are seeing play out here. All right. So that's kind of the big map for today. If you're watching this from home, I've created a Google Classroom place for you to upload your map to, just so I can have a look at that, and that's what your classwork is for today. All right. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. So some states in Europe, like France and England, make that push towards centralization. Some will buck, right? England bucks, right? With that. Some states, like in Italy and the Holy Roman Empire, are going to face a whole lot of challenges towards that centralization, right? The social interaction is gonna cause the rise of merchants and the bourgeoisie, right? Right, and of course, yesterday we spent a lot of thesis time, so I have that kind of extra stuff there. All right, so that is all for today. Sapriati.